For the past 4 months, I've been carrying a secret that feels both like a fragile miracle and an unbearable weight. At 28 years old, after 2 agonizing years of trying to conceive with my husband Newton, we finally received the news that changed everything. I was pregnant. But this wasn't just any pregnancy, it was a beacon of hope after countless miscarriages left us shattered, heartbroken, and questioning if we'd ever become parents. Each loss had carved a deep scar into our lives, leaving me terrified that something would go wrong again. The fear became suffocating, so much so that we made the difficult decision to keep the pregnancy hidden from everyone, even our closest family. It wasn't just about protecting ourselves, it was about shielding them too. My mother still cries on anniversaries of those lost babies, and my father retreats into silence for days whenever he thinks no one is watching. If this pregnancy ended in tragedy, I couldn't bear the thought of reliving their devastation or worse, grieving publicly while they blamed themselves. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. The nausea, fatigue, and constant worry were bad enough, but hiding my growing baby bump required creativity and lies. I wore baggy clothes, avoided family gatherings, and invented excuses when people asked why I seemed different. Every glance at my reflection reminded me how precarious this all was. What if someone noticed? What if my body betrayed me before I was ready? And what if history repeated itself, snatching away the life growing inside me once more? These thoughts haunted me daily, turning joy into paranoia. Little did I know, keeping this secret would soon spiral into something far darker than I could have imagined, a storm within my own family that would test every ounce of strength I had left. When my younger sister Elle announced her promotion party, I knew it was going to be an emotional minefield. She had been through so much in the past year: her betrayal at his bachelor party, the public humiliation of a cancelled wedding, and months of burying herself in work just to survive. So when she called me, her voice trembling with desperation, begging me to attend because this might be our last chance to fix things, I felt the weight of guilt pressing down on me. How could I say no? But deep inside, I also feared what this night would bring. My pregnancy was still a secret, one I'd guarded fiercely for 4 months, not just from her, but from everyone except Newton. The thought of stepping into that house, surrounded by family who hadn't seen me in weeks, made my stomach churn. And then there were my parents. They weren't subtle about their expectations. Every phone call turned into a lecture. You've avoided every family gathering lately. Do you realize how hurt Elle feels? This is her moment. Their words stung, not because they were wrong, but because they carried the unspoken accusation that I didn't care enough. Of course I cared. That's why I hesitated. Being around people meant risking exposure and, worse, risking judgment if something went wrong. What if someone noticed my growing belly, despite my baggy dress? What if I slipped up and revealed too much? But the pressure mounted until it became unbearable. Elle's pleading voice echoed in my mind. I need you here. Please, just once. Let's pretend everything's okay. And my parents' constant reminders about family loyalty only added fuel to the fire. It wasn't just obligation. It felt like manipulation. Still, I convinced myself I could manage one evening. For Elle, for them, for the sake of keeping peace. The irony hit me as I stood in front of the mirror, tugging at the fabric of my shapewear under a flowing gown. Here I was, trying to protect my fragile miracle, while walking straight into a situation fraught with tension. If only I'd known then how dangerous this harmless celebration would become, more how far some would go to steal the spotlight. As the evening wore on, I thought I had successfully navigated the precarious balance of keeping my pregnancy hidden while celebrating Elle's big night. But then Aunt Mia arrived, and everything unraveled faster than I could have imagined. She cornered me in a quiet moment after catching me off guard in the hallway, her sharp eyes narrowing as she studied my face. "You're glowing," she declared with an exaggerated grin, her tone dripping with excitement. Before I could deflect or offer a vague response, she reached out and pressed her hands against my stomach, her expression morphing into one of absolute certainty. "Oh my God, darling, you are pregnant," she exclaimed, drawing me into an embrace so tight it left me momentarily breathless. I begged her to keep it quiet, my voice trembling with panic. This wasn't how I wanted to share this news, not here, not now. and certainly not at Elle's party. But Aunt Mia wasn't someone who understood subtlety or restraint. Without hesitation, she marched outside to the backyard where everyone was gathered, her energy electric as she clapped her hands for attention. "Everyone? Everyone," she called out, her voice cutting through the music and laughter like a knife. When all eyes turned to her, she didn't hesitate. "I have some incredible news our dear Claire is expecting." Her announcement was met with gasps and cheers, but the joyous reactions felt hollow to me. It wasn't just the shock of being exposed. It was the way Aunt Mia framed it as if this were some miraculous event that redeemed years of heartbreak for the entire family. "This is the miracle we've all been waiting for," she gushed, tears streaming down her cheeks. The room seemed to freeze for a split second before erupting into chaos. Relatives swarmed around me, hugging me, congratulating Newton, and crying over what this meant for our future. Amidst the commotion, I spotted Elle standing off to the side, her smile faltering as she watched the scene unfold. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I saw something flicker in her resentment. Whatever it was, it sent a chill down my spine. In that instant, I realized the weight of Aunt Mia's words hadn't just celebrated my pregnancy. They'd cast a shadow over Elle's moment, amplifying her insecurities. As the night wore on, I noticed Elle retreating further into herself, nursing drink after drink. Little did I know, her simmering resentment would soon boil over into something far more dangerous. The tension between Elle and me reached its breaking point later that night, fueled by alcohol and her simmering resentment. After Aunt Mia's announcement about my pregnancy, Elle had retreated further into herself, nursing one drink after another as the party carried on around her. I noticed her glancing at me from across the room, her expression a mix of bitterness and thinly veiled hostility. It was clear she felt overshadowed, but I never imagined it would escalate to what happened next. At one point, I excused myself to use the bathroom upstairs, feeling increasingly nauseous from the heat and stress of the evening. As I stepped out of the restroom, I found Elle waiting for me in the dimly lit hallway. Her words came sharp and cold, slicing through the silence like a knife. "Maybe this pregnancy will end, just like all the others," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "Another miscarriage, wouldn't that be fitting?" The cruelty of her statement hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me trembling with anger and heartbreak. How could she say such a thing? My own sister, mocking the pain I'd endured for years, the countless losses, the sleepless nights, the shattered hopes. Before I could respond, she rolled her eyes and muttered something dismissive under her breath. But then, as we stood near the top of the staircase, she took a step closer, her balance unsteady from the drinks she'd consumed. For a moment, I thought she might apologize or soften, but instead, she shoved me hard, sending me stumbling backward. The world seemed to slow as I grasped desperately for the railing, my heart pounding in panic, not just for myself, but for the tiny life growing inside me. And yet, even as I fell, Elle's laughter echoed behind me, cruel and hollow. "Relax, it was just a joke," she called out, as if pushing a pregnant woman down the stairs could ever be considered harmless. As my body crashed against each step, pain shot through me, but my mind raced with fear, not for my broken wrist, but for the baby. Had I failed again? Was this nightmare going to repeat itself? Every second felt like an eternity, and when I finally came to a stop at the bottom, tears streamed down my face, not just from the physical agony, but from the betrayal that cut deeper than any injury ever could. The moment I lost my footing on the stairs, time seemed to stretch into an eternity. My instincts screamed at me to protect the fragile life growing inside me, and without thinking, I threw my arms around my stomach in a desperate attempt to shield it from the impact. But the force of the fall was merciless. My body crashed down each step with a sickening thud, my wrists taking the brunt of the blow as I tried futilely to steady myself. Pain exploded through my arm, sharp and searing, and then everything went black. The last thing I remembered before slipping into unconsciousness was the overwhelming fear that this might be the end, not just for me, but for my baby. When I finally came to in the hospital, the sterile white lights above blurred together as reality slowly sank in. Newton's face hovered over mine, his eyes bloodshot and filled with worry. "You're okay," he whispered hoarsely, gripping my hand tightly, or what was left of it. A cast now encased my right wrist, heavy and unforgiving, a constant reminder of the trauma I'd endured. The doctors explained that the fracture was severe. I'd need to wear the cast for at least 6 weeks while my bones healed. As they ran tests on the baby, every second felt like hours. When the doctor finally delivered the news that miraculously, our child was unharmed, a wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it brought tears streaming down my face. But their warnings were sobering. "You're incredibly lucky," the doctor said, his tone grave. "Both you and the baby survived this incident, but your pregnancy is still high risk, given your history. Any additional stress or physical strain could lead to complications." He emphasized the importance of complete bed rest, no exceptions. His words hung heavily in the air, a stark reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. As Newton helped me sip water and recounted the chaos that followed my fall, the panicked shouts, Elle's tearful confession, the frantic ambulance ride, I couldn't shake the image of her standing silently at the top of the stairs, watching as my world crumbled beneath me. Her actions had consequences far greater than she seemed willing to acknowledge, and though my body bore the scars of that night, the emotional wounds cut even deeper. The betrayal from my parents cut deeper than any physical wound I had endured that night. As I lay in the hospital bed, still reeling from the trauma of Elle's actions, their words felt like a second assault this time, one I hadn't seen coming. When my mother called after the incident, her voice wasn't filled with concern for me or my unborn child. Instead, it carried an edge of desperation as she pleaded with me not to press charges against Elle. "Think about her future," she implored, her tone sharp and unyielding. "If you take this to court, it will ruin her career. She'll lose everything." Their argument escalated quickly, each word slicing through me with precision. They accused me of being selfish, ungrateful, even heartless. "How could you do this to your own sister?" My father barked over the phone, his voice trembling with anger. "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us. By tearing your family apart." The accusations stung not because they were true, but because they revealed where their priorities truly lay. To them, Elle's potential job loss outweighed the fact that she had shoved a pregnant woman down a staircase. My pain, my fractured wrist, and the terror I felt for my baby's life were dismissed as collateral damage in their quest to protect her. But what hurt most was the way they framed her actions, as if pushing me was some forgivable mistake rather than a deliberate act of violence. "She didn't mean it," my mother insisted, her voice softening only slightly. "You know how much pressure she's under. It was just a moment of poor judgment." Poor judgment. The phrase echoed mockingly in my mind. How could they justify endangering two lives with such callous indifference? Their refusal to hold Elle accountable made me feel abandoned, as though my worth as their daughter paled in comparison to their need to shield her at all costs. When they resorted to threats warning that they'd disinherit me if I pursued legal action, I realized the depth of their betrayal. In their eyes, I was no longer their child. I was an obstacle standing between Elle and her so-called bright future. And yet, despite their harsh words, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay silent. Not when doing so would mean condoning her behavior and theirs. The decision to press charges against Elle felt like stepping into uncharted territory. But I knew it was the only way to hold her accountable for what she had done. Despite my parents' relentless pleas and their thinly veiled threats, I couldn't ignore the gravity of her actions. Pushing a pregnant woman down the stairs wasn't just reckless. It was dangerous and selfish, an act that could have cost me not only my health but also the life of my unborn child. When Newton and I finally submitted the formal complaint, the ripple effect tore through our family like wildfire. Chaos erupted almost immediately. Elle's reaction was nothing short of theatrical. She sobbed hysterically, accusing me of ruining her life while conveniently ignoring the fact that she had nearly destroyed mine. "You always get everything," she screamed during one heated phone call, her voice cracking with emotion. "Everyone loves you. Everyone celebrates you. Even last night, all anyone cared about was your stupid pregnancy announcement. Did you ever stop to think how that made me feel?" Her words dripped with bitterness, as though my happiness somehow diminished hers. It was infuriating, listening to her twist reality into something unrecognizable. blaming me for overshadowing her when she had been the one to shove me in cold blood. Meanwhile, my parents launched a campaign of guilt-tripping texts and calls, each message more desperate than the last. They accused me of being vindictive, of throwing away years of familial bonds over a simple mistake. But what stung most was their silence after I stopped responding. For days, there were no updates on Elle's condition or any attempt to check on my recovery. They simply cut me off entirely, as if punishing me for daring to stand up for myself. Their rejection burned deep, leaving me isolated yet resolute. If this was the price of justice, then so be it. I wouldn't back down, not now, not ever. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations and raw emotions as Elle stood before the judge, her face streaked with tears. She clutched a tissue in trembling hands, sobbing uncontrollably as she begged for leniency. I didn't mean to hurt her, she pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of guilt, or at least what appeared to be guilt. But even through her tears, there was an undertone of resentment in her words, as if she still believed I had somehow provoked her. Claire knows how hard things have been for me, she continued, glancing briefly in my direction. She should have stayed out of my moment. Her statement sent a ripple of disbelief through the room, including from Newton, who sat rigid beside me, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might shatter. The judge listened impassively, but when he finally spoke, his words cut like steel. Your actions were not only reckless but deeply selfish, he said, his tone firm and unyielding. Pushing a pregnant woman down the stairs could have resulted in catastrophic consequences, not just for her, but for the life of her unborn child. This cannot be dismissed as a mere mistake. He sentenced Elle to probation, ordering her to cover all my medical expenses, attend mandatory psychological counseling, and meet regularly with a probation officer. It was a sobering verdict, one that left her visibly shaken but not entirely repentant. My parents, sitting stoically in the back row, remained steadfast in their defense of her. During a brief recess, they approached me, their expressions a mix of frustration and desperation. You're making too much of this, my mother whispered harshly. Elle is going through a difficult time. She's not herself right now. As if that excused everything, the shove, the callous remarks, the disregard for two lives. Their refusal to acknowledge the severity of her actions made it clear where their loyalties lay. To them, Elle wasn't the perpetrator. She was the victim, trapped by circumstances beyond her control. But no matter how many excuses they offered, nothing could erase the truth. She had chosen violence over reason, jealousy over love. And now, we would all live with the fallout. 5 months of silence, of fragile but necessary distance had passed since the chaos surrounding Elle's sentencing. Newton and I had built a quiet life for ourselves, focused on preparing for the arrival of our son. When he was finally born, healthy and perfect, it felt like the first truly joyful moment we'd experienced in what seemed like forever. The days that followed were filled with sleepless nights, tender moments, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. But just as we began to settle into this new rhythm, my parents shattered the peace. It happened on the 5th evening after bringing our baby home. As Newton and I prepared dinner, exhausted but content, there was a soft knock at the door. My heart sank when I opened it to find my mother standing there, tears streaming down her face, clutching a basket overflowing with baby gifts. Behind her, my father stepped out of their car holding an oversized teddy bear and a bottle of wine. We had to come, she sobbed, her voice trembling. After hearing about the baby, we couldn't stay away any longer. Her words hit me like a slap. It wasn't joy or love driving them here. It was entitlement. They acted as though nothing had happened, as if they hadn't spent months defending Elle's reckless behavior while dismissing mine. Newton appeared beside me almost instantly, his posture stiff with suspicion. He didn't trust them, not after everything, and neither did I still. My mother pressed on, gushing about how thrilled they were to be grandparents, and insisting that now was the time to put the past behind us and reunite as a family. That's when she crossed the line. With a forced smile, she declared, now that the baby is here, surely we can forget all this nonsense and move forward together. We're a family again. The room went silent except for the faint cries of our newborn in the next room. Newton's jaw tightened, his patience snapping like a brittle twig. You lost the right to call yourselves family the day you chose her over us, he said, his voice low but laced with fury. Elle nearly killed Claire and your grandson before he was even born, and you defended her every step of the way. You shielded a monster instead of protecting your own daughter. How dare you show up here acting like nothing happened? My father tried to interject, claiming they only wanted to celebrate the baby's arrival, but Newton cut him off sharply. If you cared so much, you would have been here 5 months ago when Claire needed support, not now, when it's convenient for you. His tone left no room for argument. When my father attempted to leave the gifts on the porch, Newton stopped him cold. We don't want anything from you, he said firmly. And if you ever show up uninvited again, we'll file a restraining order. This is our home, and this is our child. You aren't welcome here. As they drove away, defeated and angry, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow, but more than anything, pride in Newton for standing firm. Our family might have been fractured beyond repair, but our little boy would grow up surrounded by unconditional love, not toxic loyalty. After the chaotic confrontation with my parents at our doorstep, Newton and I knew we couldn't take any chances. Their uninvited arrival and their audacity to act as though nothing had happened was a stark reminder of how far they were willing to go to force their way back into our lives. It wasn't just about them wanting to see their grandson. It was about control, entitlement, and an inability to accept that their actions had consequences. They had chosen sides when it mattered most, defending Elle's reckless behavior instead of protecting me, their own daughter. That betrayal ran too deep to ever be forgiven, let alone forgotten. So, we made a decision. Our family would never again be vulnerable to their manipulation or interference. The next morning, Newton called a security company to install cameras around the perimeter of our home. He insisted on high-definition models with motion sensors and night vision, ensuring there wouldn't be a single blind spot. If they come near this house again, he said firmly, his jaw clenched, we'll have proof. And if they step foot on our property without permission, we'll press charges. His determination gave me strength, but it also underscored the gravity of our situation. This wasn't paranoia, it was survival. We weren't just protecting ourselves. We were safeguarding our son, whose innocence deserved to remain untainted by the toxicity of my past. But cameras weren't enough. Later that day, Newton scheduled a meeting with our lawyer to draft additional legal measures. We wanted everything documented. The restraining orders against LT explicit terms, barring my parents from contacting us, and contingency plans in case they violated those boundaries. Our attorney assured us that these steps were not only prudent but necessary. You can't predict what people will do when emotions run high, she warned. Having these safeguards in place ensures you're prepared for anything. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I nodded in agreement. If my parents or Elle thought they could bypass the law, or, worse, harm us in some way, we needed to be ready. As the days turned into weeks, our new reality began to settle in. The cameras became part of the landscape, their unblinking lenses a constant reminder of the world we'd left behind. My heart ached sometimes, thinking about the life I once imagined, a life where my family celebrated milestones together, shared laughter over holiday dinners, and welcomed each new chapter with open arms. But that dream was shattered long ago, replaced by something darker and more painful. Now, our happiness was rooted in separation and building a future free from the shadows of resentment, betrayal, and fear. Every night, as I rocked our baby to sleep, I whispered promises to him. Promises of love, safety, and a life untouched by the chaos of my past. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain: we would face them together, as a united front. And no matter how hard my parents or Elle tried to worm their way back into our lives, they would never succeed. This was our story, now one written on our terms, with hope as its foundation and resilience as its guiding light.